Meanwhile, analysis requested by Liberal Democrat Party Senator David Leyonhjelm, and thank goodness for him, shows that about 870,000 non-citizens are claiming $15 billion a year in welfare benefits. I looked at this morning, gobsmacked. Talk about generous, and that would also indicate to me that we're also very, very slack. And maybe there's an opportunity here to use what we have discovered as a way of cutting down on public servants who don't do enough work. Anyway, Senator David Leyonhjelm joins me on the line right now. Senator, thank you for your time.
Good afternoon.
You must have been as gobsmacked as most of us were when you discovered that how many non-citizens living in Australia are eligible for welfare?
Yes, 870,000 in total, of whom 710,000 around about are in countries in which we don't have a bilateral what do you call it, a social welfare agreement.
A social security arrangement, yeah.
So we don't get welfare in their countries and vice versa. It was higher than I thought. I knew there'd be quite a lot. We've been doing, or getting the Parliamentary Budget Office to do costings on quite a range of our policies because we think the government is just lazy and lost the plot, as your introduction suggests.
Yeah, there's a lot of laziness I see in all of this. It's not that there aren't instances where public servants should get off their backside and go and make a difference and rearrange people in housing and make sure that those who are receiving welfare as a non-citizen are receiving it appropriately. But there seems to be an unwillingness. You know, they're not willing to make a change.
No, well, the problem is, this is my personal theory, that there are just now so many people who are net recipients of other people's taxes, other people's money, and of course they all vote, and too many politicians are jumpy about losing their vote if they take money off them. It's quite unfair, of course, and politicians should be braver. They should say to them, well, look, I know it's not going to please you, but really you are getting money that you don't deserve. You're not entitled to it. It's other people's money, and just because the government is taking it off them and giving it to you doesn't make it legitimate. And we have to get back to the situation somehow or other where we accept that we are personally responsible for our own finances, and only if we are really in trouble, only if we are poor, only if we really are down on out of luck, should we hold out our hand for other people's money.
Which is what welfare is designed to do, those who are deserved of a hand up. Now, I instantly thought, hang on a second, is this about refugee money? Because we assist refugees when they settle here, as we need to do. Mm-hmm. But there's the majority of this figure are not refugees at all, are they?
Oh, no, the refugee figure is really quite small. It's now gone up from 10,000 a year to about 14,000, 15,000 a year, I think, is the latest figure. So,
So who are these people?
These are people who've come to Australia as immigrants and are now on welfare of some description, and so they don't have jobs, or they're on various kinds of welfare. There's quite a range of things, and they're not. They have never taken out Australian citizenship. Now, the question that I think is appropriate to ask from this is, should they have ever been invited or allowed to come into the country in the first place? We have two types of immigrants in broad terms, leaving out refugees. We have skilled immigrants who I think we need more of them. They're very, very welcome. Mm-hmm. They bring lots of talent and expertise to the country, so we need more of them. But if those people didn't get welfare, say when they became unemployed or something, then obviously they would have a good think about whether to come here in the first place, and only come here if they're reasonably confident they'd be able to get a job. And that's great, they'd be fantastic immigrants. The other category is family reunion. There's quite a lot of them as well, and there's a good proportion of them that I think end up on welfare. They get sponsored by their families, of course, in the first instance, but obviously family love only goes so far, and especially if there's other people's money in the form of welfare floating about.
Too right.
That's where they end up. Now, I think we should be very, very picky about family reunion. If we're going to be generous to family reunion, and compassionate arguments would suggest we need to be reasonably generous, then the least we can do is say, well, we're not going to pick up the tab for you if you don't have a job.
You need to rely on your family.
Exactly.
Not on the taxpayer. You need to rely on your family, not the taxpayer.
Correct. That's exactly right. And the thing is, of course, that we've got a massive, great deficit with our budget, $35–40 billion. I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's higher tomorrow night. We've got a massive, great debt. And
34 million we pay in interest only per day.
Correct, yes. Well over $1 billion a month. And here we are handing out welfare to people who aren't citizens. What do we think we're doing? We really shouldn't be so silly about it. We're more generous than practically any other country in the world.
Exactly, and this is not about being xenophobic. It's not about being racist. It's about looking at a budget and working out what you can afford to pay.
Exactly. I mean, I'm very much in favour of immigration. I'm not one of these people who say we're full clear off and, we don't want any more immigrants. I just don't accept that at all. But not all immigrants are equally beneficial to the economy. Some are very beneficial and others are not. And the ones we shouldn't have a situation where you can expect to come to Australia as an immigrant and go on welfare if you can't find a job. We shouldn't allow that to occur.
Should not allow it to occur, and your voice needs to be heard. I want to take a break. I want to come back. You were part of an article about a week or so ago, which I think has great relevance today on the eve of the budget. A few suggestions for Scott Morrison and the way you would shape a budget. I'd love to get your views, and I'm sure our listeners would be interested to hear what you've got to say. We'll come back after a break with Senator David Leyonhjelm. 20-1, Senator David Leyonhjelm is on with me at the moment. Just as a footnote to our discussion on the incredible amount of money we're paying non-citizens in this country, and just let me repeat, it's $15 billion a year in welfare benefits to about 870,000 non-citizens. Someone is being way too lazy. And then we read today about New South Wales public housing tenants. These are entitlements that have obviously never been audited or checked enough as well. It's the same kind of entitlement where you've got someone who, now years later, having lived in a housing commission property, they've got 2 bedrooms that are free. The family's moved out. And someone doesn't have the wherewithal or the willingness to say, well, hang on a minute, we need to move you. We need to move you back into a 1-bedroom place because there's a family on the list of 60,000 who are on the waiting list that need a 3-bedroom home. What is wrong with the public service?
You're quite right. There is an issue there, though, in that public housing should be viewed a bit like welfare payments as a temporary bridge, for people in hardship. It should be for people who have got a temporary problem because they've fallen on hard times and they need housing and accommodation because they can't find it or they can't afford it any other way. Now, we treat unemployment benefits, for example, in that way. The attitude to unemployment benefits is it's not a welfare for life. It shouldn't
transition
be welfare for life. That's right. It's while you get back on your feet. I believe, and there are plenty of others who would agree with me, I think that public housing should be treated in the same way, that once you are capable of affording, paying for housing in the normal way, you don't have housing commission property as other people are waiting to go in there. The problem is that people get into these places and they then regard it as essentially property.
Their lifetime privilege.
Their lifetime privilege, that's right. And they don't want to move. The housing commission, the housing department sort of goes along with that, and you end up with large numbers of people who are far more deserving having nowhere to live. And I don't think it's the way it should work at all. It should be viewed as a temporary help out while you've got problems, and once your problems are over, you're out.
Yeah, Mark wants to take us up on that. Mark, go right ahead. David Leyonhjelm is listening.
Hello, Chris. Hello, David. Look, I totally disagree with you about public housing. I live in public housing because I've got a chronic illness. I totally disagree what you're talking about.
What do you want an extra 3 empty bedrooms in your home?
No, I don't. I just think that if there's 3 people living in, you've got a 3-bedroom house, 1 bedroom's empty, so what? It doesn't matter.
Well, so what? There are 60,000 on the waiting list with families who need help from the government that could move into a 3-bedroom house and they'd be looked after. And you could easily live in a 2-bedroom, or if you've only got yourself a 1-bedroom place, Mark. How hard is that to understand?
Chris, we got 3 people living in our house.
Well, do you need a 3-bedroom house?
Can you listen to me, please? I'm on a disability pension and we pay full rent because we've got someone living in our house who is working. So why penalise the ones... Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm listening to you, Mark. I don't understand what you're saying because... Or you don't understand what we're saying here.
First of all, I'm just saying, I like to say that you're going to penalise... Just say if you've got a 3-bedroom house, you've got 2 people living in it. So what?
So what?
So what?
It's not your home for a start, Mark. And the State and Territory Housing Commission should have the right to move people around into accommodation that fits their number.
If you're disadvantaged in the community, it doesn't matter if you've got 1 person, 2 person, 3 person in a 3-bedroom house.
Yeah, OK. David Leyonhjelm, a response to that?
Well, I think he's forgotten who's paying for it, quite frankly. I mean, it's his fellow Australians, and holding out your hand to your fellow Australians saying, doesn't really matter what I want, you've got to pay, there's a bit of an attitude problem there that I don't think most people who, at least those of us who pay tax, would feel comfortable with.
No, you're right. Mark, another Mark, go ahead.
Hi, Chris, how are you?
Good, thank you.
In the 80s, I grew up in Housing Commission House. Now, we were one of 3. Now, when the last one turned 18, which was me, the Department of Housing gave my parents a letter asking them to show just cause why they couldn't move out into a smaller premises. And they had to move out into a unit because we all moved out.
And they probably didn't want to, but they realised that they didn't own that house.
No, but it was their situation. It's why have a 3-bedroom house if there's only 2 people?
Yeah, good on you, Mark. Thank you very much for the call on that one. So, you wrote recently in the Financial Review, David Leyonhjelm, you had some advice for Scott Morrison. If you want a decent budget, don't start with the old one. How would you redesign the budget?
Yes, that's right. I used an old Irish joke about how to get to Dublin. So the problem is that governments year after year after year take last year's budget and then just fiddle with it. They, up a bit here, down a bit there, and basically assuming that most of it is okay, and they just continue on with a few tweaks here and there.
They're trimming the same suit, aren't they, really?
Correct.
Year in, year out.
So, yes. So what I argued for was 2 things. One, the one that I particularly think they should take note of is what's called bottom-up budgeting, where you essentially tell every department, every program, every agency that receives Commonwealth funding, assume you're starting with a blank sheet of paper and you're redesigning your whole department, your whole agency from scratch. Think about everything you do and whether it's worth doing and why you need to continue doing it, and should it cost as much as it's currently costing. Don't assume that just because you've always done something that way that you should continue doing it in the same way.
Question the conventional wisdom.
Correct. As I said, it's called bottom-up budgeting. Funnily enough, probably one of America's worst presidents ever introduced bottom-up budgeting, Jimmy Carter, to I'm not sure it was all the departments, but some of them at least, so he wasn't totally bad. Anyway, it's done occasionally in business. I have a business background, and I'm familiar with the process. It is disruptive. It's hard work because it forces everybody to have a good think about what they've been doing, what they're doing and why.
Almost an audit, not a budget.
Well, yes, an audit is mostly a matter of, are you spending the right money the right way? This bottom-up is, are you spending money on the right things? The other aspect that I published that I put in the article that was published in the Financial Review was also top-down budgeting, and that is a process that New Zealand uses, essentially sets some big figures. So how much are we going to spend? And then leave it at that. Say, okay, we can only afford to spend this much money. how are we going to divide that up? And you ministers, you departments, you've got to argue amongst yourselves and come to an agreement.
Not a bad approach, is it?
How much is each way you're going to get? Now that's what that guarantees is you don't go and spend massive sums of money that you can't afford.
Well, that's what most people in the household do when they realise how much income they make. They work out, okay, that's all we've got. That's what we can spend on stuff around our home, including whatever TV network we're on or whatever, and then they work out where to direct it. Whereas in government, we do it the other way around.
Exactly right. The normal people, people living within their means, say, well, look, we can only afford to have either a holiday or fix up the house, renovate the kitchen or something.
Not both.
You don't do both. Yeah. Whereas the Australian government says, oh, no, we'll do both and put it on the credit card, and somewhere down the track it might get paid off, but then again it might not too.
Yep. I appreciate your input. Thank you so much for your extended time, David Leyonhjelm.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Senator Leyonhjelm. It makes a great deal of sense on so many crucial issues. But just remember, he talks about the fact that, the government goes about things saying, we need to do that, we need to do this. Forget about how much we can afford, we'll just put it on the credit card. Well, we're paying per day $34 million on interest alone. And you don't think the living standards of your kids and their kids will crash in the years to come? Of course they will.